Okay, thank you, Jason. Hopefully you can see my screen with the PowerPoint. Thank you, everyone, as always, in the middle of a Saturday, and today is a special day on Juneteenth Day, joining this group. And so the topic today is when Confucius met Lao Tzu. So let's start with the conventional wisdom. I think it's fair to say that most of us view Confucianism and Taoism as diametrically opposing schools of philosophy. And there's good reasons to think that. On the left-hand side, I say, Confucius, what did he profess? Well, he firmly believed in perfecting the person by devotion to achieving benevolence, or in Chinese, Ren, through the practice of righteousness, Yi, right, Li, wisdom, Zhi, filial piety, Xiao, etc. He always spoke of in great reverence to the ancient sage kings, and he firmly believed that education and learning is the essential nourishment of life. He even said that it's more important than giving people food. And what did Lao Tzu profess? Well, some of the quotes from the book of Lao Tzu, I won't read the whole thing, but basically he said, and all these things that's listed on the left, and then you will be happy. Abandon these rights and sense of righteousness, all those pursuits, and this is how we're going to achieve happiness and stop chaos in society. And the second quote here is, hence rights arise out of diminishing loyalty and trust, and it is the beginning of disorder. And learning and worry no longer exists. You learn all this stuff, it just makes you worried all the time. So we have to stop it. Certainly seem very diametrically opposed. So surely, if Confucius and Lao Tzu were to meet, they would have argued, right? Well, unbeknownst today to, I would say, most people, including Chinese people, that they actually probably did meet. And what happened when they met? There are two credible sources and a whole bunch of other not so credible sources of their meetings. And so today we'll focus on the credible ones. And the first one I list here is the Book of Rights. As you know, it's one of the sacred books of Confucianism. So in there, when Confucius was asked by one of his top students about some very detailed question of the proper way to carry out a funeral ceremony, Confucius said, I once followed Lao Dan. Lao Dan is the name of the actual name of Lao Tzu, to assist a funeral in our neighborhood. On our way, a solar eclipse happened. Lao Dan said to me, Qiu is Confucius's name. And Qiu, put down the coffin and stop on the right side of the road. Stop the crying and wait for the eclipse to end. When light returns, we will proceed. He said that was what rights dictated. When we returned from the funeral, I asked, a coffin must not turn back. In a solar eclipse, we do not know when it would end. Would it not have been better to keep going? Lao Dan said, when a noble man is to have an audience with the Son of Heaven, meaning the king, he sets out when he sees the sun. Before sundown, he lodges and presents his offerings to the spirits. When a high official is on an assignment, he also sets out at sunrise. And before sundown, he rests. Now, a coffin must not set forth before sunrise, nor does it proceed until after sundown to rest. As for those who travel by starlight, perhaps only criminals and those rushing to their parents' funerals would travel as such. When there's an eclipse of the sun, How do we know that we would not see the stars? Moreover, a gentleman in his performance of rites would not risk exposing the deceased relatives to bad omen. This is what I learned from Lao Tzu, from Lao Dan. And in the same chapter in the Book of Rites, there are actually 3 other passages where in answering questions about rites, Confucius was citing Lao Tzu as the authoritative, the definitive teaching regarding rites ceremonies. Here's a passage in Chinese, just if anyone's interested. So the other credible source is the most venerable ancient text of Chinese history, Records of the Grand Historian by the author Sima Qian in the Han Dynasty. And in the biography of Lao Tzu, it was said, Lao Tzu was from the Quren village in the state of Chu. His name was Li Dan, and he was the Zhou official archivist or central librarian. Confucius went to Zhou to ask him about the rites. Lao Tzu said to him, "You speak of men who have long decayed together with their bones. Nothing but their words has survived. When his time has come, the gentleman rides a carriage. When the time is not in his favor, he makes his way disheveled as he is. I have heard that just as the best merchant keeps his store hidden, so that he appears to possess nothing, so the true gentleman conceals his abundant inner power beneath an appearance of foolishness. Rid yourself of pride and desire. Put aside your fancy manner and your lustful ways. They will bring you nothing but harm." This is all I have to say. And in the same book, the Records of the Grand Historian, there was another telling of the story. And this was in the biography of Confucius. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. I haven't finished the previous passage yet. So after Lao Tzu said this, kind of chided Confucius, after the visit, after he had taken his leave of Lao Tzu, Confucius said to his disciples, "Birds fly, fishes swim, animals run, these things I know. Whatsoever runs can be trapped. Whatever swims can be caught in a net. Whatever flies can be brought down with an arrow. But a dragon riding the clouds into the heavens, that's quite beyond my comprehension. Today, I saw Lao Tzu and he is like a dragon." So basically, Confucius was completely bewildered after the visit. So now we move on to the other account in the same book. And this was in the biography of Confucius himself. It says, Nangong Jingshu, he was a student of Confucius and I think also an aristocrat. He went to speak to the ruler, the Duke of Lu, said, "I plead to accompany Confucius to the state of Zhou." The ruler of Lu agreed and provisioned 1 carriage and 2 horses and 1 young servant to assist in their travels. They traveled to Zhou to learn about rites, and it was said that they perhaps visited Lao Tzu. As they bid farewell, Lao Tzu saw them off and said, "I heard that the wealthy gift with money. The benevolent person gifts with words. I am not capable of wealth, so I steal the honor of a benevolent person and gift you with my words. One who is smart and deeply perceptive, but near death, is the type of person who likes to criticize others. One possessing broad knowledge and prowess in debate to the point of endangering himself is the type of person who exposes the shortcomings of others. Live your life without self and serve the government without self." Here's an interesting side note. Apparently in the Han Dynasty, at the time of the grand historian, about 400 years after Confucius, there was a very popular thing to do in aristocrats' tombs when they die. They like to have a stone relief illustration in their tomb of the story of Confucius visiting Lao Tzu. Here on the right side is a rubbing of such a stone tablet. From the left to right, the person with the cane is Lao Tzu. The middle is a 7-year-old child named Shantuo. And the person on the right of the child is Confucius. And the person on the far right is Confucius's favorite student, Yan Hui. And more than 70 of these artifacts have been unearthed by archaeologists. And the kid, in case you wonder, the kid in the middle is Shantuo. And there's a popular story about him, Confucius encountering him and engaged in a debate with him and was totally defeated by the child. And Confucius actually treated the 7-year-old child as his teacher. So apparently this was a very, the story of Confucius learning from Lao Tzu was a very popular and endearing story a few hundred years after Confucius. So that was just an interesting side note. And so here we have two, right? You have these two books and two very different portrayals of Lao Tzu, frankly, kind of perplexing. In the Book of Rites, which was written probably roughly 200 years after Confucius, Lao Tzu was portrayed as this meticulous practitioner, purveyor, and authoritative expert of rites. Kind of totally opposite the philosophy of Lao Tzu that we know of today. And then you have the records of the grand historian, written about 400 years after Confucius. Lao Tzu was this old wise man refusing to discuss the rites and chiding Confucius to become more humble. So at this point, I'd like to pause and get feedback from the group here about what are your thoughts. And then after that, maybe we do this for 10 minutes or so. And I'd like to share with you my personal speculations. So what do you all think? Do you see some commonalities and differences between the accounts of the Book of Rites and the Grand Historian? Anyone want to jump in? By the way, these are questions that have been debated by scholars for at least 1,000 years. And there is absolutely no consensus. So there's no right or wrong answers. It's been proven for 1,000 years. So do not be shy.
Is it possible that neither of these represent the true Lao Tzu, but that they represent maybe something that's going on in the Chinese culture in those time periods? I mean, the true, I mean, it's such a mythical figure. Who knows, who the true Lao Tzu was, or true Kungzi was? Who knows? But it may say something about whatever was happening at the time. Someone wrote the Book of Rites or the records of the Grand Historian.
Yeah, excellent point. Right, it's kind of interesting, these tombs relief illustrations. It seems like it was a very popular story. Maybe there was an oral history of that. Oral history certainly, over hundreds of years is influenced by culture. And as you said, the exact Confucianists who wrote the book of chapters in the Book of Rites, it seems like they're from a particular school of Confucianism. We discussed that last week. They're from Xunzu's school, who was very focused on rights. So yeah, exactly. Any other thoughts to share? Just feedback, gut feelings, whatever.
Yeah, I do. I'm thinking that since I like reconciliation, the Book of Rights is talking about rights, but in the other one, he's talking about chiding Confucius to become more humble, but they're both not exclusive of each other. You know, I mean, you could talk about rights, but if that, or maybe he didn't want to talk about rights because he thought that Confucius held on too much to that, you know, that it became his desire to make it work. So, but he could have been, he could have still felt, Lao Tzu could have still felt that rights were important. It wasn't important. A good teacher knows at the time when he's speaking to you what the need is. They're inscrutable. They're like the dragon.
Yeah, excellent points.
I think Phil and James have the hands up.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, somehow when I'm in this full screen view, it's a little bit hard to manage the participants. So thank you, Jason, for helping with that. So Phil, please.
Yeah, but it seemed to me in the first account, which is closer to the historical event, it was an account that when Lao Tzu was still an official, which is interesting, and he gave a kind of a answer that would be fitting of an official, but was very, very mysterious, that's incomprehensible. So in a sense, when he was an official, I don't know whether he was hiding at that time or whether he just wanted to be very mysterious and let Confucius figure it out or whatever. Okay. In the second one, I think history has passed and he's been mythologized. And now he's no longer an official. And in a way, he was giving an answer that in some ways maintained his status as a mysterious mythical figure. But because China had become more, more streamlined as a culture operation, then it seems to me the mystery in this case needs to hide. So the second one seemed to me your duty is to hide, not necessarily because you're risen so high and you're so mysterious, but you need to hide with your wisdom because only then can you give guidance because you're pressured by your official acts to give a straightforward answer. So you have to hide and be invisible as you can, which is the way maybe true wisdom is it is incomprehensible. So in a situation which demands rigor, then you have to kind of hide in order to live in that kind of structure.
Excellent point. Yeah, I'll touch in a few minutes. I'll touch a little bit on the historical background and what was going on a little bit in their lives, and I think you might find that those two to corroborate some of your points. And James, please. You're muted. You have to unmute.
Yeah, sorry about that. I see what I learned from you through a Western lens, and which is critical. You know, so I learned this in a sense critically, although I've been exposed to Lao Tzu and you know, and the story of Confucius and so forth, and the schools through world history. And here and other groups and some reading, but the what I do see like a big division, and I think I like what Audrey had to say. I mean, I think that it's both ways. There's both the division, and there's the you know, the shock of recording Lao Tzu as a dragon, and the shock of the encountering the dragon, the conflict over extreme views, with Confucius being a systematist and Lao Tzu being an ethicist. So and this possibility, and I have a question: is there any possibility that during this later period, the 100 years or whatever it's called, is there a possibility that the religion of Taoism already existed in ancient China? Or is that when did that actually start? People wearing their hair a certain way to show that they were Taoists and so forth.
That was in the late Han Dynasty. So I would say maybe 200 or 300 years after the records of the Grand Historian, the religious branch. Yeah. But that doesn't mean some of the beliefs of the superstitious beliefs and whatnot didn't exist, right? The religion came from the populace. So yeah, great points. And I don't see any hands up, so let's move down. We'll have plenty of.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I cannot raise my hand, so I'm going to raise my physical hand.
Great.
So I will say personally, I think it's one of Lao Tzu child Confucius. This one is from Zhuangzi, right? So I personally, I don't believe that's the true account. Actually, I will consider this true account. And personally, I believe Zhuangzi is fabricated, okay, much later time to try to a story try to argue against the Confucius. That's my personal belief. So I will not consider Zhuangzi's statement about Lao Tzu childish Confucius is historical account. And even have some scholar believe in the Sima Qian's account, the Lao Tzu may not be the same Lao Tzu as the Taoism Lao Tzu. They have some thought about this, but we are not sure because Lao probably a last name, and they have other people have the same last name. So that's just for reference. And at this moment, we probably can believe they met, and then we can continue. Otherwise, it's difficult to continue. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for bringing those. There's all kinds of theories by very prominent scholars. They argue vehemently. Yeah, there's a theory that Lao Tzu was actually after Zhuangzi, was one of the latest founders of during the Warring State period, one of the latest philosophers. So it runs the gamut. And I do totally agree with you. That's why in this discussion, I excluded Zhuangzi's account. Zhuangzi clearly, he was a fable teller. I think if we took his story seriously, he would laugh at us, like, oh, you guys are a bunch of, dimbats. So yeah. So okay. So let's move on. We'll have plenty of time for discussion. And I think really excellent points. I think in my speculation, you may find a lot of agreement with what all of you just said. So here's my speculation. Of course, it's not my creation. I just sort of collected pieces of different scholars' theories into my own personal filter and bias. Okay, that's all. And so, first of all, should we believe these accounts? I really personally, I tend to believe them because there's no motive to lie. Book of Rites was written by Confucianist followers, and one of their sacred, the canons of Confucianism. So why would they come up create a fake story about Confucius being Lao Tzu's student? That doesn't make sense. What's the motive for that? And there's a theory by a lot of prominent ancient scholars saying, well, this is a fake story that was maliciously inserted by Taoists. Well, that doesn't make sense either, because why would Taoists create a fake story portraying Lao Tzu as like this Confucianist? What purpose does it serve them? If they create a fake story, it would be more like Zhuangzi's story, not like this. So, and then the grand historian, I think it's the same reason why I believe it, because Sima Qian was a self-proclaimed follower, loyal follower of Confucianists. He greatly admired Confucius. So why would he record, as a careful historian, record a fake story? Of all stories that he could record in his precious book, he includes fake stories to embarrass Confucius. This guy was just being admonished, like, oh, what you asked about is not even worth talking about. Where you need to be is get rid of your lust and conceitedness. That doesn't make sense. So I have to say, being that we're 2 millennia or more later, we don't find a lot of credible motive or evidence to really refute these stories. And so why would they pretend like 2,000 years after these writers, we actually know better than them? So that's my perspective on this. So what happened? Can we reconcile these? So here's my possible reconstruction of what happens. That Confucius visited Lao Tzu at least twice. So that these two lines of stories account for two different visits. The first time was when Confucius was 17 years old. Why 17? I infer this, number one, by the way that Lao Tzu addressed Confucius, directly calling him by his first name. In Chinese tradition, that would be very rude, shockingly rude, unless you're like an elder talking to a child or a teacher talking to a student. So he said, "Chill, put the coffin on the side of the road." This was clearly, and so I believe this was when Confucius was fairly young, and that certainly the relationship was an apprentice-teacher relationship. And it talks about the total solar eclipse. So in the Spring and Autumn Annals, it was a book written at the time of Confucius, roughly speaking. It records a solar eclipse in that year when Confucius was 17. And the biography of Confucius in the Grand Historian also said that when Confucius was 17, he was already well-known, noted among the aristocrats of Lu as being a very talented young person in Li, and was gonna be on his way to greatness later. So of course, these are all very speculative, circumstantial, but that's my proposition. That when he was an older teenager, he was an apprentice of Lao Tzu. And this was the first story that in the Book of Rites was an account of this period. And in the Sima Qian's history book, that was another encounter when Confucius was in his mid to late 30s. And why do I speculate that? The student who went to the Duke of Lu and asked for him to sponsor this trip, he became a Confucius student when Confucius was 33 years old. So it had to be after that. And when Confucius was 35, and this is kind of echoes back to what Phil said earlier, the state of Zhou was thrown into great turmoil. The princes usurped the throne and tossing the state into complete turmoil. The king escaped and went into exile. And of course, Lao Tzu being the central librarian there, we can only infer that he likely escaped the chaos and went somewhere else. And in the Grand Historian's books, that Lao Tzu saw the decline of chaos in Zhou, he went westward, and no one knows where he went. So I'm speculating that this is the second visit, and But what about the opposing views? How do we reconcile that? So here's my theory, or the theory that I favor. The word rule, which is the Chinese character and normally translated as Confucian or Confucianist, the character itself long pre-existed Confucius. So in that sense, Confucius was not the founder of Confucianism. So what did it mean before Confucius? Well, until Confucius' time, some prominent scholars interpret that this character referred to a profession common to the descendants of the former Shang Empire. Shang was the dynasty before Zhou. So this is a populace that is now subjugated under the Zhou dynasty. And one of their popular professions was being funeral directors and organizers of some ceremonial events. And Confucius and Lao Tzu both belong to this class of people. And Confucius was once Lao Tzu's young apprentice. Over time, what happened to Lao Tzu? Well, he transformed and evolved. He personally witnessed the chaotic decline of the rule of Zhou and society in general. And Lao Tzu became disillusioned with rights as a useful means to achieve harmonious society and formulated his own Taoist philosophy. Meanwhile, Confucius witnessed the same social degradation, but he would remain faithful to the rights and saw it actually as the fortification as the solution. And when he didn't know that in the years apart, Lao Tzu had changed. So one day, in his late 30s, he wanted to go back to his old teacher and get more wisdom. And when he visited him, you know what happened. At that time, as most 30-something-year-olds, we tend to be kind of a little conceited, especially someone who thought a lot about how society formulated his philosophy, worldview. So I'm sure he was a little arrogant, and Lao Tzu could see that. And that's why Lao Tzu said what he said to Confucius. And that's why Confucius was shocked. This guy who taught me everything about rights now is telling me all this different stuff. And I don't know what to think about this. This is someone I really revered. So so that's my personal perspective on this. So anyway, enough of history. This is a philosophy meetup group. So let's get into a little bit of philosophy. I think they don't disagree as much as we think. There are some fundamental beliefs that they always shared.
Excuse me,
yes.
Phil has a hands up. Do you want
yeah,
interruption or you
please.
don't want interruption?
No, this is fine. This is a good point. Yeah, Phil, please share your thoughts.
From what you're saying is that Chinese philosophy, you want to call it that way, at least the two grand masters, were always operating in a political situation or structural situation of society. And what you're saying is Lao Tzu saw the trouble and he, in his way, withdrew to supposedly a higher understanding in a way, right? Because this is just too much trouble for even a very smart guy to handle. I'd rather be with nature and learn about it internally for myself. Whereas Confucius, I guess, is more committed to society in a sense and said, yeah, I know this is problematic, but I'm going to stick with it and try to do the best I can given this very, very troubled political interference from free thinking, if you want to call it that way. But I have to build a structure nonetheless within that in order to help society in some form. Would that be a pretty good interpretation of what you say in a more abstract sense?
Yes, I would agree. I would only make a minor nuance comment. Is Lao Tzu himself, his own book, was still very much kind of a leadership book, if you will, telling rulers how to do things. So he didn't completely depart the world. Zhuangzi, this is where Zhuangzi's innovation came in. Zhuangzi completely abandoned any kind of government rule, not interested. The Zhuangzi is about self, the individual person, how to find liberation, spiritual liberation. But what you say is absolutely true generally about Confucianism and Taoism. In Chinese, we have two rough categories that are popular. We call 出世, exit the world. So that's a label we put on Confucianism and Buddhism, that their philosophy is to get out of the society. And Confucianism is 入世, means enter the world. Basically, get yourself in more into society and do things to make it better. So yes, and so what are some shared beliefs in my view? They both share always, even after their transformations, that utopia was a state of more natural, unforced harmony, with less greed and material desires. And rights arose out of decline from this state. Even Confucius agreed with that. In the Li Yun Da Tong chapter that we studied last week, the second part, right after Confucius described what the perfect world once was, he said, now that the great Tao has fallen into obscurity, the world serves rulers of familial inheritance instead of the populace. People care for above all others only their own parents and foster only their own children. Material goods and the exertion of efforts are for the self. Familial inheritance of government offices became the right. Inner walls, outer walls, ditches, and moats are used to protect cities. Rights and righteousness serve to bound social order. So basically what he was saying was that society became worse and worse. People became untrustworthy and harmful to each other. So people came up with all these things to, protect society and maintain order. And so it was really not a system out of choice, not the perfect thing, but this is the best thing that we could do now. And Lao Tzu says something very similar. When Tao is lost, they even use the same word, same character. We have virtue. When virtue is lost, we have benevolence. When benevolence is lost, we have righteousness. When righteousness is lost, we have rights. It's this cascade of degeneracy. There's another related passage in Lao Tzu. When the great Tao, again, it was exactly the same words in Chinese, the great Tao, lays to waste, we have benevolence and righteousness. When wisdom and cleverness emerge, we have great deceit. When relatives do not get along, we have filial piety and loving kindness. When state is in misled chaos, we have the loyal servant. So he's saying, all these things that we consider virtue is really a reaction of people's imperfections and poor nature. So this is basically all I have to say. I thought to excite discussion for the rest of our session, I list the Confucius vision of utopia and Lao Tzu's utopia side by side. And maybe we can examine, compare and contrast and talk about which one we like more personally and whatnot. And so let's see. So I'll read them. And then afterward, we'll open up for discussion. And so first, Confucius Utopia, we read this last week. When the great Tao prevails, the world community is shared by all. The worthy and able are chosen as office holders. Mutual trust is fostered and goodwill cultivated. Therefore, people do not regard only their own parents as parents, nor do they treat only their own children as children. Provision is made for the elders until their death. Adults have employment and the young are enabled growth. Widowers, widows, orphans, the childless elders, as well as the sick and disabled, are all well taken care of. Men have their proper roles, women their belongingness. While people hate to see goods lying about on the ground, they do not necessarily keep it for their own use. while they hate not to exert their own effort, they do not necessarily devote it for their own ends. Thus, selfish scheming does not gain popularity, and robbery, theft, and havoc fail to rise, so that outer doors do not have to be shut. This is called the state of great harmony. So it's kind of a, not to get political, but I guess modern day we might say it's kind of a socialistic vision, kind of a Bernie Sanders world, if you will. Lao Tzu's utopia. So this is a quote from Lao Tzu. In a small nation with few citizens, even if it has the weapons of 10 nobles, it does not use them. The citizens take death seriously and do not migrate far. Even though they have boats and carriages, there's no purpose for riding them. Even though they have armor and soldiers, there's no purpose to put them into formation. Effect the citizens to return to nodding robes for records. Find deliciousness in their food, beauty in their clothes, contentment in their dwellings, happiness in their customs. Neighboring nations look after each other, and sounds of roosters and dogs are mutually audible. Basically, he's saying the states are so small that you can like see each other from the distance, and you can hear each other's animal sounds. Citizens in neighboring states live out their lives without reason to visit one another. So it's that kind of small state, people living in primitive contentment and just live their lives without a whole lot of desires. So anyway, I leave you with this. I'll leave this up and let's have discuss as a group. Let's see. I see a lot of hands up. Great. We'll go with Jerry. I'm sorry, David, since we haven't heard from him, and then Jerry, and then James, and then Phil.
Okay, let's have a small question. On the previous slide, who is the when and the we under Lao Tzu? If you go back one, he's comparing what states here? When the state is in misled chaos, we have the loyal servant. So what is he comparing? A foreigner or against ourselves? When we have feel piety and loving kindness. So who is the opposing entities here?
Yeah, great question. You're pointing out basically a failure in good translation, and that's my bad. But I couldn't find a better way. There is no when or we in the original. The original text is extremely concise. You have to understand during that period, it was before the invention of paper. So things were written on either silk or bamboo boards, and that was very expensive. So you had to use very few words. So basically, he was just describing a cause and effect and the state. Really, when it's in the state of Tao, that's when virtue would arise, and when whatever is in a state of virtue lost, benevolence arises. So it's kind of a cause and reaction and cause and reaction and a cascade of degeneracy. Yeah.
Okay. My larger point is, you mentioned the paper. Paper was a Chinese invention, and they had very dominant empire until 1500 with the turn inward. To what extent is either Confucius or Lao responsible or can be laid at fault with their decision to isolate themselves and turn away from the world, to ban shipping? You mentioned boat rides, to ban exploration and turn inward. And at one reason is it was laid to Confucius, but what is your view? Thank you.
Yeah, excellent question. I believe you're referring to in the early Ming Dynasty. Ming's naval power was extremely strong. The fleets made 7 voyages, went all the way to Eastern Africa. And then the emperor just ordered all that to be stopped. And I think I totally agree with you that this has a lot to do with unique features of Chinese philosophy and tradition. I think both are actually both schools are responsible for that. Turned inward. Confucius, one of his main tenets was the way of the king versus the way of the bully, and that's my own translation. The way of the king is that you cultivate your own state, and don't worry if it's very small. That if you are culturally truly superior, other neighboring nations will come naturally to join you because they want to be one of you, and never use force. The moment that you use force, exercise force to colonize or invade other nations to expand your territory, you've actually, that's a mission of your failure, your cultural failure, that your culture is not good enough to do that on its own naturally, that you had to use armies. And of course, Lao Tzu very explicit, right? It's against big states and all this stuff. So Ming Dynasty is very much dominated by Neo-Confucianists. There's always these scholar officials who constantly warn the emperors against expansionism because it's against their beliefs. It's almost like a religious belief, you know. So I think that force eventually won out, and the policy turned. But you know, I'll put in disclaimer. A lot of these is my own interpretations, my own understandings. You talk to someone else, they'll give you a totally different story. There's one theory that's that the Ming emperor, he overthrew his nephew and took over power. His nephew, no one knew where he wound up. He escaped. So there's one theory which I don't really buy, that he had the fleet go search all over the world, all the way to East Africa to search for this nephew because he wanted to capture the nephew and kill him. And then after 7 voyages, he gave up. But I don't know. I think it's kind of ridiculous theory. Let's see. I think next was going to be Jerry, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna make what's gonna be a gross oversimplification, and then you all will correct me and I'll understand this better. But could one say that Confucius was more concerned with rights and prescriptions, that if one followed certain rules, like say, you know, honoring one's elders or one's parents, that would lead to a good society? And Lao Tzu was kind of the opposite, that rather than following some rigid rule, one keeps in mind the end, the goal of harmony or peace, which will then write its own prescriptions or create its own rights, which are going to be malleable. You know, the way to behave in one situation might not be the best behavior in a different situation. The point isn't to behave a specific way.
Yeah.
Am I grossly oversimplifying that?
Well, I think you captured a lot of the essence of the two different views. And it's interesting, you know, nowadays in the US, a lot of these kind of leadership gurus are very often cite Lao Tzu. You know, even in American society, there's that kind of, it used to be sort of this very active manager or leader but these days we're saying, well, you know, you have to step back as a leader, let people do their own things and not try to take credit all the time. Just let people exercise, figure out their own styles, get things done without too much intervention, but just more being the spiritual leader. I don't know. I'm probably rambling, but I'm just agreeing with you.
Right.
Just
Quick,
two
quick,
different
quick
leadership
follow up. I'll be
styles.
really quick. A friend of mine once, she's from China. She told me that China is more policy oriented and the U.S. is more law oriented. You can almost sort of see the difference in philosophies and the way that the governments operate. So there's interesting observations she made.
Yeah, a lot of Chinese do say that. There's a common saying in Chinese. There's three elements to consider in judging, in punishment, whatever punitive system. The qin li fa. Qin is the circumstances or emotional considerations. Li is logic, what makes sense, what's reasonable. And fa, the last one, is law. So it's not just about law. You have to consider these three things that are equal and make a balance. So it's some differences. Yeah. Let's see. I think it was James and then Phil.
Yeah, I think we would call that motivation or intention. That first one, Chen. Yeah, that's I think that's a really good explanation for a certain philosophical perspective for making judgments. I think that's kind of like a lot of what I'm seeing here. The main thing I'm seeing, I think, is inside the question of the ought from David Hume. That was kind of like highlighted by David Hume, but it's in this idea of benevolence and behavior and comportment, if those are correct words to use. In other words, or benevolence and righteousness and the Tao. So the Western view, which probably which I got from Aristotle, is kind of the idea that virtue is innate, whether it's automatic or developmental or inherited in some way. It ends up being a innate. It ends up being a fixed quality, and behavior and comportment are driven by virtue. In other words, goodness, wisdom, practicality, good judgment, things like that, all are drivers of the individual towards benevolence and righteousness. And here I see it the other way around. The quote in the reading was, I'm sorry, I don't think I did write it down. I'm sorry about that. But
Do you want me to go back to a certain slide?
No, it wasn't in your slide. It was in the reading.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, the one from Zhangzhou. Yeah, so that's all. I do see that kind of like division from Western thinking. The Western thinking is that the benevolence and righteousness are byproducts of the fact that you have leaders with good thinking, and they're being respected, and then wisdom and cleverness would not be bad, because wisdom would be the best possible thing coming from people gaining experience and becoming older and so forth. So, but I think in this Tao, it's actually, these are actually being stripped away. These are one by one being stripped away, even filial piety and loving kindness. And then finally, there is a saving grace at the end. Even in misled chaos, there is the loving servant. So I love the irony. I love the irony in the Tao, and I love the idea of society being a structure and consisting of stages. And the stages don't necessarily represent classes. They represent stages of social order. So that's why I'm very attracted to Lao Tzu. Thank you, Pin. This is wonderful.
Thank you. There's a saying that some Chinese people say, Confucianism is our bread and butter, and Taoism is our medicine. When we're hurting emotionally and bad things happen, sad things happen, we often go to Taoism. But everyday living, we try to regulate ourselves with Confucianism. Of course, I'm oversimplifying things, but it's a kind of a common saying. Phil, and then JP.
Yeah, it seems to me that I agree with you that they sort of have a similar schema. But seems to me the schema has something to do with, if you want to call it paradise laws or whether state of fallenness. In other words, at the highest level, you have virtue, and then it falls to benevolence, and then falls to righteousness, and then it falls to rights. I think at that point, it seems to me, Lao Tzu said, no, we're fallen too far. And whereas Confucius was more a pragmatist, like if that's all we have left, we need to not let it go any further, if possible. And I think that also states that, like Lao Tzu wants to say we've fallen so far, we really have to go back to the original, which is a relationship with each other in nature. And then was Confucius tried very much to hold society. And I think Confucius, instead of going back to nature, is going back to a better original society, which has better rights. And so therefore, in a sense, he was a pragmatist. This is what we got. And it seems to me like Lao Tzu is saying, and that Lao Tzu seemed to think that society has gotten too big to really be able to recuperate on that level that Confucius trying to recuperate. And so therefore, in a sense, he wants to withdraw, and the ideal world where you could actually interrelate with each other in a neighborly way. I mean, everybody knows everybody in society, each person knows anybody. And in a funny way, Western, at least in Greece, had this attitude, right? They had all these city-states, and Plato himself talked about the size of the state could only go so far before everybody is so distant from each other, you really don't know. And Aeschylus, which is, I think, a generation before Plato, and actually even before Socrates, wrote a very interesting play that I haven't read, but I've heard about it. It was after Persia tried to invade and destroy Athens, and what Athens did was to summon a kind of tribute from other city-states in order to repel them. And because they succeeded defeating Xerxes, Aeschylus later on wrote this play called The Persians. And I asked a Greek historian, like, how did Xerxes respond to this play, which is about him and Persia? And she says, no, the more interesting thing is how the Athenians respond. Because what that play was about was that if you retain this power of collecting money from other city-states, you will turn into an empire, which is to disrupt the whole idea of a small independent state that could relate to each other on equal level. And the Greek city-states are very, very different from each other. And so he warned them, but like Athens didn't listen, and they eventually lost to Sparta in the Peloponnesian War. So in some sense, it seems to me Confucius lived with the inevitability, the society, the state, the city will get larger, and so therefore you have to manage it to the state of fallenness as it is, rather than say, this is just way too much, right? And so like a kind of withdrawal. This is what I mean when I originally said a withdrawal to an independent sort of like, well, sort of like what the hippies try to do, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, it was pretty explicit in the Book of Rights passage that Confucius was kind of accepting what it is now, and this is what's the best we can do under the constraints. And Lao Tzu is a kind of abstraction. You know, how do we transcend ourselves, and also on the practical side, the Confucianists. Confucius and Mencius all went around trying to convince leaders to become good leaders, and Lao Tzu wasn't concerned with that. And this whole thing about the small state, and you know, sometimes it reminds me actually in the U.S. This debate regarding local control versus bigger government, central control versus states' rights or whatever. It's anyway. Enough of me babbling. JP,
just
yes.
1 minute. Pin, remember, Madeline has a question and she cannot raise her hand. So for some reason, so okay, so just
Sorry, I didn't
just put her
see.
in the
Yeah, I didn't see that. Yeah. So, okay, please, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Here's my question. I read about a very interesting thought experiment or a psychological experiment that was done. The people who were the subjects, so to speak, which could be any of us, they were told to imagine that they were in front of a wall, and on the other side of the wall were a whole bunch of people who you could organize into any kind of society that you wanted. Anything that you wanted, you could organize a society into. One group of people, subjects, were told that, and that they were told that they could have any role that they wanted in the society. The other group of people were told that they would not know what role they would have until they were put into it. And they came up with two very different types of societies. The people who were told that they could choose a role came up with something that sounds much more Confucian. And the people who were told they could not choose a role came up with something that sounds much more Taoist. And I'm wondering what other people think about this, if anyone has read this same thing I have.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Any thoughts to share, feedback, comment from anyone? I see a lot of hands up. We'll go Elena, JP, and then Dave P.
I think JP is next, right?
Oh, JP is. I'm sorry. Okay, JP.
Yeah. Can I? I don't know what to comment on the previous thing, but I did have a question. If somebody wants to comment on that, that's fine. I'll wait a second.
This is Elena, and it's a great discussion. So thank you so much for that. I also have just a question, and I don't have comments on the previous part of the conversation.
Hold
I
on.
will go after JP.
I have a comment.
Hold on to your questions. Yeah, let's go with the comments first. Phil, a quick comment. Yeah.
Yeah, as a quick comment, like it seems to me the people who doesn't know what the role will be is very different from the ones who know, because you already it's a difference between limits and the unlimited. If you're limited, then in a sense, you have to organize within what the limits would allow you. If you are not told, then you're kind of unlimited. Your imagination will allow you to choose anything. So therefore you're unlimited and you're free to choose anything you want. So therefore, you obviously would want to choose the unlimited form of expression or form of reality. So I think that the limits does have a role to play in terms of at least government.
Thank you. Anyone else is on this topic? Jerry or Dave, or you have other questions?
Yeah, as has been noted in the chat, Madeline is referring to Rawls' experiment in the theory of justice. And I think that what he was trying to do there was suggest that if people designed a society without knowing where they would fit into that society, the kind of society they would design is one that creates a social safety net for the least fortunate members of that society. The idea being, if I don't know where I'm going to be in that society, there's the risk I'll be among the unfortunate. Therefore, I'm going to create a social safety net for that unfortunate group. That's the idea behind it. I don't know how that fits in with Lao Tzu. He seems, and again, I'm going to anachronize wildly, but he seems more libertarian than a social safety net kind of a person.
Yeah, I would say so. Any other comments on this topic? And then before I make a quick thought, and then we'll move on to Elena and JP. James, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Say something?
I think the difference between this idea of choosing a societal principles versus Confucianism is kind of with Confucius, you always have this theme of filial authority. I think the filial model, I think in Confucius, is always elevated, perhaps all the way to the top. And in a way, it kind of explains the tendency for degeneration in some of those Chinese societies. The idea that leadership was going to be, in a sense, always value driven. So it would not, benevolence and righteousness and so forth, but in the language of Aristotle, in a sense, that's oligarchy. In other words, you have the rule of the richest, and that's how in the work by Aristotle called which is I think equivalent to Confucius in a way, it's called the Constitution of Athens. It's not a constitution as much as a history book, and you can see that in his telling of the history of Athens, things start out with these tribes being led by groups of nobles, and the nobles, what distinguished them? It wasn't necessarily the general richness, but the fact that they had arms, the fact that they had arms, they owned arms, and they owned horses, and they had the ability to exert their authority. So this sort of like change from oligarchy to forms of democracy that occurred over the centuries in Greece, almost corresponding to the time of Confucius and Lao Tzu, chronologically, is very, I think, is very telling. So we have the same forms of government, prior to Confucius, oligarchical forms of government prior to the writing of the laws by Confucius. This effort to write the laws by various persons in Confucius and following that period. So that's what I'm kind of like really getting from this. And we're all concerned now about what kind of laws will govern us in the future. That's a kind of like a thought that a lot of people are having. So yeah, thanks for letting me contribute.
Thank you. I'll just make a quick comment. I don't know if it's directly related to but as far as historically, it's often said that in China, during times of stability, Confucianism tend to dominate. and during times of chaos and oppression, internal turmoil, Taoism tend to be on the rise. One example is actually the Han Dynasty itself. After a lot of warfare, suffering of people with the fall of the Qin Dynasty, bandits, rebels everywhere. When Han Dynasty finally reunited China, the first few emperors were very much Taoists. They really favored the Taoism philosophy of ruling, and they did well. And they let people heal. The economy slowly healed. And then after China became wealthy and stable again, the Confucianist scholars won out and convinced the new emperor to adopt Confucianism and abandon Taoism. So this is, so anyway, I just thought I'd share that. So yes, next we go to JP, who has a question, and then Elena, and then Dave P, and then Jerry. So JP, please.
Yeah, I wanted to understand, I guess, your understanding of the concepts of Wu Wei and Yin Yang. Like, I just wanted to hear, because, and I know they're related to Taoism. I sort of wanted to get your take on what you thought of those. I've heard that Wu Wei is like not forcing, and that's a big concept in Taoism. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on those two concepts.
I have a question on that too. Could I ask that question and then maybe you could respond? Does that make sense? It's
yes,
very similar.
Sure.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that I can appreciate the discussion on the differences in political philosophy between Confucianism and Taoism, but I wanted to advance the idea that some of the most profound statements of Taoism, at least, are about the nature of reality, so-called metaphysics. And when you look at the Tao Te Ching, the first verse is and maybe one of the most popular, is that the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. And I think that is sort of Lao Tzu's admonishment against systems-based thinking, because a system is an abstraction. And so, in some sense, not to misrepresent or mistake the map for the territory itself. And that represents really why he broke with the more rights-based, systems-based thinking approach of Confucius, right? Where everything is systematized. He's saying that, hey, these words that we're using aren't necessarily limited, and so they can't explain the ultimate nature of reality. And then the second verse of the Tao also, very metaphysical, about the union of opposites, which is a key concept in Taoism, that you can only know good because there is evil. Those, I think, are really important metaphysical assertions that Taoism makes. And I wanted to ask, does Confucianism have anything similar as far as, understanding the nature of reality?
Oh, well, a lot of very deep questions. I certainly don't pretend like I have the answer, but I can share my thoughts. So Wu Wei, that's one of the most important and hardest to interpret concepts of Taoism. Lao Tzu professed basically accomplish everything by doing nothing, right? Wu Wei is Wu is not, and Wei is do, so not do. And different people have their own different takes. Some people say, oh, it means that when you have a good system, then you set down a good system, then as a leader, you don't have to do anything, right? People would just, when you have a good government, people, for example, people would just, it'll just work well. And so you should focus on building a good institution. That's one interpretation. There's other ones. Lao Tzu talks a lot about the leader should not be in the front. Sit back, let people accomplish. The best leader are the ones where people have accomplished and they don't even know who you are. will they forget who you are? So I think, you know, this sort of applies to a lot of things in life. Those of us who raise kids, you know, I think when they're young, you educate them with rights, you know, you teach them. But at some point, you have to let them you have to really force yourself to take a few steps back and let them develop on their own, right? Become their independent people. And Lao Tzu really says that. He says, raise people without possessing them. And so anyway, we probably should have like 5 meetups about this, but this is just a few random thoughts I share. Whether
Pin,
Mhm.
okay, I have some comment on this one.
Mhm.
Okay, I think Jerry has no, David P is the question. Another is about metaphysics, right? Is David? Yeah, yeah. Personal, I feel Lao Tzu has more developed his own. The Taoism has more developed his own moral theory through the metaphysics, and I believe Confucius also has the same way. But if you only read the Analects, probably you lost this part. And if you read I Ching, which had a lot of Confucius comment, you will see how he related the metaphysics back to his moral theory. Okay, but this one later on get lost, and later on in the Song Dynasty, about 1,000 years later, being recovered by the Neo-Confucianism. Okay, that's the later part we may cover later. And another David's question about the so-called Wu Wei, and just like the Pin said, that's we need another 5 hours to talk about this one. And then on Tuesday evening, we have another Dao De Jing reading. We read the chapter by chapter. We are going to go same 81 weeks. And then after you through these 81 weeks, you probably will get the idea of what's the meaning of Wu Wei. And right now we only cover to I think it's chapter 7. So we still have a lot of weeks to go. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Yeah, basically, Jason I think he plans on doing a meetup about I Ching, and that's the quick answer is yes. Confucianists do have metaphysics, and you will find a lot of that, I think, in I Ching. And there's a saying in the Analects that when Confucius was in his old age, I think when he was 70, he became really interested in studying I Ching. And also well-known quote from Confucius. He said, well, anyway, I won't get into that.
What about the yin yang?
Yin yang is part of the concept of I Ching. So Confucius also studied that. So you have to, in I Ching, the book of I Ching, there are sort of these annotations that are written either by Confucius or followers of Confucius. So that's where you will find those thoughts. Yeah. I forget the order of who's gonna be. I think it was
Elena.
Elena. Okay, yeah, and I see also Madeline has another question, so we'll circle back to her. So Elena, please.
Okay. So my question is to everyone who did live in China or anywhere in the East and have just really experienced what it is. So my question is, so Lao Tzu says that the Lord of Heaven say there is no door to fortune and misfortune. People invited in. And based on that, like our society in the United States is pretty much based on English laws, and it's so much rooted in like there is no forgiveness. You have to demonstrate us this and that, and then we'll see how. And so our society is quite overregulated in many ways, and yeah. So it's is there balance in China and other societies if they somehow, if the society is being based on this political philosophy and governmental principles, somehow, or like just give me your experiences. Whenever I went to that part of the world, I was a tourist or I was there on business, so I didn't experience living there and what it is there really. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, anyone who's lived in Asia want to share thoughts?
I hesitate to do this because we've got some actual Chinese people here, but consider this a perspective from an outsider, from an expat in China, not from an insider living in China. I lived in China for a couple of years, and what I observed, as an expat, was that on the one hand, there is an authority there, and you had to be careful of that authority. But I didn't get the sense that there was a lot of law. I don't know if that makes any kind of sense. But you would drive down a street and there'd be a cop in the intersection, but no one would obey any street laws. So there was authority, but I didn't feel a lot of law. I know that sounds like a contradiction. Maybe someone could explain that better than me.
I agree. Go ahead, Jason, please.
I'm interested. Jerry, can you tell me when you live in China and which city you live in China?
For me, it was a long time ago. So if I go now, it might be totally different. So I need to explain that. For me, it's been at least 20 years since I've lived in China. So it's a long time.
Which city?
And I lived in Tianjin, which is very close to Beijing.
Okay, and personal, and I think Pin and I are original from Taiwan. And in our, at least I just say, in my point of view, I think Taiwan probably more Chinese than China. And if you ask me which group of people is most traditional Chinese, I probably would say Southeastern Chinese, because they are minority, so they tend to preserve their own culture. So that's just my opinion. But I think if you ask me, I will say, if you want to observe the traditional Chinese society, probably China is not a good example because they have been through communist and the Cultural Revolution, and another thing has been changed. So that's my opinion I'd like to share. Yeah.
But I do think in both Taiwan and mainland, there is this general attitude that you don't follow stupid laws. And it's for the individual to judge which laws are the good ones and which ones are the stupid ones. And if you follow stupid laws by the letter, you're kind of stupid yourself. There is that kind of an attitude. I see Jason laughing, so I assume he's agreeing. And yes, you were talking about the back to the previous, I think it was Jerry. Yeah, I agree. When I went to mainland, also it's been many years. It's like, actually, I always feel like the cops in the US are very intimidating. They're scary. And in mainland, I was never afraid of the cops. There are cops everywhere. None of them wear guns. And I just have no problems going up to them and chatting with them and ask them for directions and recommendations for good restaurants and whatnot. It's a much more casual, friendly interaction. And you can even, joke around with them, insult them, it's all good. It's a very different environment or vibe.
Yeah, Ping, you want to share some? This is Kevin.
Kevin, yes, please.
Yeah, actually live mainland for 30 years, almost. My first, born there, live there, educated over there. So if let's see, do comparison, Western culture last 200 years. That's our civilization, modernization. If you come to compare to mainland of China, that would be 40 years. Maximum 50 years would be just a dramatically change. Lifestyle from, shelter, you name it. It's just not one word. the question I'm going to be specific to the traffic. They can walk that. It's I give some one excuses about population. Population is tremendous. It's like if you live, let's say, central, I live in Toronto. If you live downtown Toronto, you could be experiencing better than Chinese. It's people need a space to stand, and it's so crowded, and also some rules a little bit every year. Law rules keep changing, better. I can share one experience about drive with drink, you drink with drive, so 20, 10 years ago, my friend cannot afford one job, drink. If you find out, then you could be lost your driver license. That's serious. So that surprised me. Back to 40 years ago, just like the gentleman said, yeah, oh, who cares? Even let's see, please catch me. I give, I give send some money or do something else. They can release me. And I also send the two, the couple links. First couple link is about Lao Tzu, chapter 18 and 80 is talk about Lao Tzu's utopian or society, small government, and also for specific Chinese word, you have one of the Kojak's. Basically, you can Kojak copy that Chinese word, go there. I shared the two words. First is about the Dao. Second is about the De. Basically, first chapter Dao is chapter 1 to 37 is about the Dao. Chapter 38 to 81 is about the De. It's so, and the last point I want to see, traditionally we treat law, that's the minimum right to follow. Rest else should be virtue, Dao is the best. For example, just now Ping share one tiny story about like why Lao Tzu call Kunzi about his first name, Qiu. That's because he's elderly, kind of treated as young. If young people call elderly first name, we consider that's rude. So it's different. Western, we directly call that or grand first name, or that's so different. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. Sorry, I haven't.
So
yeah.
just let me just. So what I've heard, Kevin was saying. So the laws that are written laws, it's something minimum that you follow. Therefore, so the traffic laws very often are not enforced because of that it's self-regulated. So drivers know, the pedestrians know. They have a common flow of their pedestrian traffic and automobiles, bicycles, and everything else. So it's just you don't need to over-regulate that particular flow. It's taking care of itself. Is that right? Like it's the principle that some particular processes are taking care of themselves, right? Don't follow the stupid laws. Just obey the principles.
Yeah, the two couple perspective to answer your question. What do you talk about the Dao way? You build any rules law, you're going to isolate other side. If, for example, let's see the traffic. Let's see if traffic you go red light. It's no the people both sides stop on the red light. However, green light, no traffic over there. That's mean a rule flaw. People could consider let's change the law first or do a second one is like doesn't mean let's see people will automatically self-regulated. It's not. We could, yes, actually for if you Asia culture, Japanese, Korean, and Taiwanese, and even Vietnam, they got like moderate, humble. That we consider that's a value.
Maybe I can share a quick story. I was in Taiwan at a department store, big department store, and they have little signs on the table that says, It's like in the gift shop department books. It says, please love yourself. Don't let your kids run around and break things. You wouldn't see a sign like that in the US. So what that means is when we say love yourself, meaning that you behave well so that you don't have to have other people come and tell you what the right thing to do is, because when it comes to that point, it's really embarrassing. So that's maybe that's kind of what Kevin's talking about too. So anyway, I've lost track of who's first, who's not. Please just jump in if you have anything to say, or if you want to go back to more of the text, the two utopia, which one you personally prefer more. I'd love to hear from, especially people who haven't spoken so far. Thank you.
Yeah, I just like have a quick comment about the law. I think that's a very big subject. That the Asian treaty law and the Western treaty law is very different. And I think that's another 3 hours discussion about the law, the concept of law. Yeah, so.
Hello. I think Fred hasn't contributed yet.
Oh, thanks.
I'm on the list, but Fred hasn't contributed yet.
Thanks, James. Just a note on that. I've found in general that there's been kind of a paradox from my experience in both South Asia, like Tibet, and in Europe and Africa. There's an interesting paradox in that it seems as a rule that the more autocratic, centralized, and top-down complex a society is, the more anarchic it is at the street level. That's manifested in a number of ways. And just as one example, Italy has a very complex tax system that is almost confiscatory among high earners. And yet it seems like the national pastime of Italy is dodging taxes. And this sort of thing happens, it seems, in a variety of different cultures. And I just think as a general rule that's the case. And I wonder how that would relate to a more Confucian versus a more Taoist type of social structure.
Yeah, anyone want to comment on that?
No, I don't have a comment on that. I'll yield to anyone who wants to.
Yeah, Stephen has a question, and he will raise his hand for some reason. So.
And Elena, I have a comment on Italy and what Fred said. And just from my experience, I lived in Europe. I was born in Russia, and yeah, that's what we see once the society becomes overregulated, bureaucratic. Then people commonly find ways to avoid the system. They go like ingenuity suddenly as a light suddenly comes in a way, and then they find a way to avoid going around the system. So that there should be a balance in general. That's like we don't want overregulate, so everyone would go in the back door and such. So that's what I've seen a lot. And I was wondering, the societies that grow, they generally have a kind of balance there. Once it becomes so bureaucratic and wouldn't have a way for to allow human ingenuity be expressed and manifested, then those societies, they kind of step down on a scale of being influential, economically advanced and such. So just my comment.
Yeah, thank you. I'll quickly share some. I think both Confucius and Lao Tzu would agree with both of you. Confucius famously said, when you regulate people with law and punishment, they become evasive and shameless. So you need to transform them through rights. I guess Lao Tzu would say, well, you know what, rights is really not that different from laws. So you just, it's still just a patch fix to regulate people. So you should abandon all that. So that's their difference. I think, yeah, Madeline a while ago said she has a question. So she's been patiently waiting. And then Jason said someone else also had a question. So Madeline, please go ahead.
Stephen looked like has a
Yeah,
question. Yeah.
okay. We'll do Madeline and then Stephen. Thank you.
Yes, this actually pertains to this whole discussion. The starting point was on what Pin had said about the correlation between times of war and chaos with Taoism and with peacetime with Confucianism. My speculation would have been the opposite, actually, because I think of other animals besides humans, like a wolf pack or chimpanzees or chickens, their famous pecking order. There's a lot of evolutionary advantage to having a pecking order within a small society or a big one, because during times of trouble, you're very well organized. So it's like the military in a sense. I also then thought about cycles of Confucianism and Taoism. And the cycles also made me think of population dynamics in nature. Like just take wolves and rabbits. There are a lot of wolves, they eat a lot of rabbits, the rabbits start dying off, the wolves don't reproduce as much, there's less predation, so the rabbits come back, there are now more rabbits, so the wolves increase again, they then eat more rabbits, etc. And it also reminded me of the application of that with Malthusianism to humans. And I'm just wondering what other people think about, and especially you, Pin, with your knowledge of the history of the times, what you think about the correlation and causation, because I would think that Confucianism in a way would be like increasing order that then eventually leads to entropy.
Yeah, thank you for the perspective. First of all, this is why it's so great for people like Jason and me engage in this group, because there's a lot of good perspectives coming from the outside, so to speak. Certain these things like conventional wisdom that I might have been raised with, you don't question. When you're told something, generalization like that at an early age, you never question it. And in fact, a lot of times this conventional wisdom could be false or flawed. So I wouldn't necessarily say that interpretation I just said is necessarily true if you carefully examine history. But also, what you said, I'm sure is true in nature, but maybe the cause, if there really is a correlation, as I said, maybe it's artificially imposed, right? Because when things are bad, people want to rebel. So Taoism kind of give them a license to do that. In some way, Confucianism too is saying, a despot has lost the mandate of heaven and you can revolt, but it's kind of a really high requirement. And Taoism just said, don't obey anything, screw it, just do it. And then during times of stability, of course, that's under dynastic imperial control. And the rulers tend to always favor, not always, but usually, more often than not, favor Confucianism, because it teaches people to be obedient, respect everything, respect the authority. So it may not be a natural thing. It's imposed by power. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Pin. I think I share with the same ideas Pin said. Sometimes we have inside the culture, and we thought we know a lot of wisdom, but attending this or hosting this meetup, I think a lot of time we learn a lot from everybody's opinion, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
So whoever is next, I know there was someone else with a question. We said that would be next.
Is Stephen the next? Is Stephen haven't
yes.
speak yet? So.
Yes, hi. So, um, am I correct in assuming that Confucianism and Taoism have a lot of similarities, but Taoism is more of a right-brained, intuitive, go with the flow, chaotic, adapting kind of philosophy, but Confucianism is very similar, but it's more left-brained, rule-oriented, and follow protocol kind of thinking? And if so, can you give some kind of an idea of the commonalities between the two?
I think things have become so complex. Any statement you make would have some truth and some not truth. Because take Taoism, for example, there's a Taoism of philosophy and Taoism of religion. And Taoism religion worship all the Lao Tzu and Zhuang Tzu and all these, and they also study their books as their like their Bible. But in reality, it's very different. And then even within the philosophy school of Taoism, Lao Tzu and Zhuang Tzu are very different. Well, not very different, but they have different focuses. Lao Tzu is still kind of advising the rulers how to run the state, and Zhuang Tzu just completely abandoned the state and then don't care. It's all about human spiritual liberation. And same with Confucianism. Later Mengzi, Mencius believed the goodness of human nature, and the exercise in life is expand. Take out those little seeds of goodness, expand. And Xunzi's opposite. People are born bad. That's why you have to regulate them with rights. So yeah, it's difficult to generalize.
So next is J. I think we have a 2J. I'm not sure. Or JP or J.
JP,
J.
yeah, JP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I'm trying to understand. So there seems to be some parallels between, I guess, in the West, what we call God, and what you would say called Taoism. I'm just trying to understand, does Taoism, I've read the Tao Te Ching, and there's a mystical quality to it, and the problem that I have with this mystical quality is it allows for quite a few interpretations. You'll have in the West, you'll have socialists maybe interpreting in a way that suits their ideology, and you'll have somebody who's more laissez-faire interpreting it for them, and these are completely diametrically opposed philosophies in the West. Sorry, so I went on a tangent there, but I'm trying to understand, first of all, does Taoism comment on where basically where we come from, in a way, the beginning? What does Taoism say about the beginning of the universe, the beginning of things? And
Yeah.
also, to me it seems, this is just more of a comment than a question. This is a time of kings and princes, and and we're I know there's a temptation to interpret it in a modern context, but I kind of want to suspend judgment on what political system it really endorses, because I don't know if it really gives a clear answer. Maybe it's talking about basically princes and nobles and saying, hey, a more hands-off approach would be more suitable, but I don't see anything beyond that, at least in the Tao Te Ching. I don't know about other works, but I just wanted to know. So the two things is, I don't, what is its comment on the beginning of things, and then the other thing is do you think that some of these political interpretations we're seeing from Westerners are just like totally off base?
Yeah, okay. So first, regarding the question, I can think of two quotes from Lao Tzu that's relevant. One is humans follow earth, earth follows heaven, and heaven follows nature. So heaven normally is what we think of kind of an equivalent to God. So it's very interesting. Lao Tzu saying above heaven, there's an even more powerful way. It's nature. So me being the physicist, I kind of like that. But anyway, and then the other quote is Tao gave birth to one. One gave birth to two. Two gave birth to three. Three gave birth to everything. What does that really mean? No one really knows. But Tao gave birth to one. It's interesting. Confucius always also talked about one a lot, about there's something unifying in, but with Confucius too, we don't really know what that one really is, but there is a one. And one gave birth to two, the common interpretation, that's yin and yang. And once you have yin and yang, so the male and female, then that can give birth to three. And once you have three, the rest is history, it just keeps multiplying. Or you can say, well, Tao gave birth to one, maybe that's like the Big Bang, because there's a corresponding, I think maybe it's from I Ching, Wu Ji Shen Tai Ji. The boundless gave birth to the maximum bound, to infinity. And infinity gave birth to yin and yang. So that's kind of like, this cosmological story of Big Bang. After the Big Bang, you have hydrogen with the element of one in the periodic table, and then after that, through nuclear fusion, you produce the atom of two, of mass two, and then three and onward, everything else. I don't know. I don't think that's what Lao Tzu was thinking, but so all these things are up to everyone's interpretation. And then the other one, yeah, absolutely. Your other point, yeah, Lao Tzu, right? Confucius, they didn't know anything about democracy or any of these political constructs we have. And it's like the story of the blind people feeling the elephant. Each one feel a different part of the elephant and will come up with a different association. So yeah, I agree with your comment there. So yes, please.
So we have a lot of hands up.
A lot
One,
of hands
two, three,
up.
4, 5. Okay, so we right now is 250. 250. So okay, of course you are welcome to stay, but okay. Who is next?
Could I just ask one question, which is just related to what Chen said? So in his, what in your interpretation, what was the three? If two was yin and yang, what was the third force or element? Thank you so much.
I think once you have yin and yang, it's kind of the two genders, right? That'll combine to give birth to something else. And then once you have that three, the existing ones will just keep combining and generate more things.
Maybe it was time dimension again, because it's just something that came to me, but I don't know. There's something was added, the third, and it was very, very, how to say, incredibly important in that particular time of creation. We'll say moment of creation, whatever it was.
The quick answer is no one knows, and whatever answer you come up with in your mind is the right answer for you. And maybe that's what Lao Tzu meant.
Well, you were talking about yin yang. I mean, it's male. If it is male and female, I mean, I think it's kind of maybe an analogy, like you're having a child. That's just me, but anyway, like you said, there's a lot of interpretations.
Yeah, I have a quick comment about the yin yang and the Lao Tzu. If you search for yin yang, I think they only talk about once in the chapter 42. Okay, only talk about once. Okay, so Lao Tzu is not the Tao Te Ching is not the one study yin and yang. So that's just a quick comment. So.
I'm a Microsoft insider, and my current build is caused me to lose my computer and my connection. So the yin of Microsoft is definitely trying to punish me this week. If I could continue, I was concerned about this idea of from the article. I think the article that Jason probably posted about was really excellent in a way. It let the ancients do some speaking, and there's this idea of the uncarved block. So the virtue of the uncarved block. I think what Lao Tzu said, and there was a kind of to me that's kind of like what is not spoken, what is not accomplished, what is left to be accomplished, and the idea that it's completely uncarved and that it's a block can kind of stand for the world, and we have like Confucius's approach to sort of like carve into that block line by line what it is that society needs to accomplish. Also, the lawgivers, you know, the legislators need to essentially do that, accomplish that task of carving in line by line what it is that needs to be accomplished. And of course, Lao Tzu wants to defer that. He wants as much of that deferred as possible. And he thinks for the health of the society, we defer the erasing the virtue of the uncarved block, which could be described as aesthetic potentiality. And also in that poem, he wants to let the world free. And he wants Confucius specifically to stop muddling the mind and causing confusion. So these are all kind of like values that I think are very, these are very important. This is what we look up to, I think, in the Tao, and the idea that you don't have to strive towards your own essence. In other words, there's an innate virtue in existence. So the government perhaps does not have to strive too hard towards its own essence and oppress the people. The individual does not necessarily have to strive towards its essence, because in a way it's already there. So I want to thank everyone and Lao Tzu for exposing these ideas today.
Thank you very much for sharing those insights. I think Jay has been eagerly awaiting to speak. The letter J.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have questions about if anyone have lived through 60s or 70s in mainland China, because I was brought up in 80s, and I didn't have much experience back in that era. But from what I heard is that, and what I've been living through during the year of 80s, 90s, I realized that people back then was a very, the society, the social connection among people are very harmonious in some way, except the governance after 90s of economic development, that society was driven based on the economy rather than social order or social, harmonious relationship with the public. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is that is society, like Confucius said, it's the purpose of Confucius, is it enforcement of social order, or is it for the to harmonize the social order? That's just my question.
I believe it's to harmonize. Yeah, I don't. Of course, I grew up in Taiwan. I never lived in mainland during the 60s and 70s, but I do have many relatives that did. And it's interesting there. I think, right, how you remember that period depends on who you talk to. So those that I know describe that period as a period of sheer horror, where neighbors attacked other neighbors. People were scared to speak up, speak their minds, and so yeah, I think it's a difficult subject with different views on that.
Thank you for giving me that information.
Yeah, my friends from the mainland say the same thing. It was a horrible, horrible time.
But they are, but your Jay, your view is not rare. Of a lot of people also, there's a reminiscence of that period. They say there was no corruption, no social ills. So it's it's one of those things. It's like in America, right? You can talk to different people about what's going on now, and you hear drastically different views, even though we all live in the same world.
And just last question, sorry for interruption. Can you, when we come to this kind of meeting, it seems that people tend to draw a parallel between West and East when it comes to the social development in the society. But is there any way we can draw a parallel in the sense of social development if the approach of two development is coming from different trajectories?
Wait, I'm sorry. What's your question? That parallels of? I'm sorry, I missed the very last part of your question.
My question is there any way that we can draw the parallel between the East and the West when it comes to the social development?
Actually, personally, I like to not do the parallels and comparisons of East and West. I think it just tends to fall into stereotypes and generalizations. I know we always have a tendency to do that, and it's fun. But actually, I wouldn't personally. I don't like to really encourage that. We just understand something by what it is. We don't always have to compare to others.
Let me say something. I think that I agree with that. It's difficult to compare just in general. So just a little bit administration. And next week we are going to do some comparison, which is Xunzi, who is talking about human nature is bad, and we compare his book with the Western Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. So that's a kind of specific comparison, not a general comparison. So that's what we are going to do next week at the same time. And we are going to read the book, what kind of chapter about the Xunzi and the Leviathan. So I think that's another thing we can do comparison. Thank you.
You're doing that here? You're doing that here?
Yeah, the same program. We are going to we have a weekly project, and every week we have a different subject. And the next week I will let the pin rest for a while, and I'm going to take care of the discussion. And then we will alternate, and we probably will find a different speaker, and then you have a different idea, because Eastern culture is a huge subject. You cannot just listen to me or Pin and you get an idea. Yeah. We need to have the people. And I even encourage people from outside to talk about this, because every time people from outside talk, I think we got a fresh idea on that. So, I think that would be interesting. Yeah, thank you.
So I see we're at 3 o'clock. So, I believe Jason and I are willing to stay on, but no one will be considered rude to leave.
I'll just quickly say something and then I'll have to go. So it's a great question that Jay asked about them. Can we compare and draw parallels between East and West? And it's just, it's like a topic. The mind wants to do that badly. Like you want to, whatever's being given to us, whatever we've heard today, we'll try to adopt and bring up to the level where it could be digestible. And some particular concepts, as you said, they don't even exist in Western society. they're like entirely, it's like entirely different. Western mind couldn't interpret it, and what I come with, sometimes like you have to just allow your mind to go and do this interpretation. Otherwise, you won't be able to absorb it for the present time. So it's kind of okay. Just even if you do stupid interpretation, it's still okay. It's just and that's why this group is amazing, because we kind of bring Western points of view and Eastern points of view on everything. And so, yeah, sometimes they just don't even intersect, and there is no way to explain this or that. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lina,
Thank you.
I believe you fully understand you are from Russia, and even Russia and America has a so big difference that you cannot like do a comparison within 2 hours. So.
Correct. And, I was so fortunate to grow up in Moscow, and Moscow is like New York, a melting pot of East and West. So we have our, say, Central Asians living next door to us and such. So I've got to absorb a lot of concepts just growing up from that part of the world, and I know how to what it is without the words. You don't need to explain me. I just know it, and this is like the highest point of everything. When you don't need to create a formula. You already know what it is, and so. But again, it's open for the next discussion.
It's a great series. Thanks, Penn and Jason.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.